If you're a musician in your 20s, I want you to hear this. I'm 35 now and I've been doing this full time for about 15 years, right? Gigs, touring, studio work, cruise ships, theater shows, teaching, all of it. Looking back, there are a few things I wish someone had told me when I was starting out, because being good at music is one thing, but building a life where music actually sustains you, that's the hard part. So I want to share a few lessons that took me way too long to figure out. The kind of things I wish someone had told me about 15 years earlier. Now, when I studied music, I was in Australia, okay? I grew up in Melbourne and then I moved to Perth to study jazz performance on drums at university. I'm lucky because both my parents were musicians, so chasing that path felt pretty natural, very supported. But at the time, all I wanted to do was play full time. That was the plan, right? And at uni, what happened was when I moved there, it was working, okay? I was playing a lot, I was practicing a lot, I was really dedicated, and I started to get booked for gigs really, really quickly when I was quite young, with other students, with lecturers. I even started doing some touring a bit. There was a lot of momentum. And what I didn't realize at the time was that momentum really came just by proximity of being around a lot of opportunities, right? So a lot of the opportunities came to me. I was asked to do things, and I feel very fortunate for that. But what it meant was that after the 4 years, after I finished studying, I moved back to Melbourne, right? Back to my hometown. And then what happened was I suddenly just didn't have that network, right? All of those contacts and work that I built in Perth, they were still there and they were kind of far away. And then when I tried to establish myself in Melbourne, it was very difficult. And I realized really quickly that I didn't actually know how to build momentum in a new city, right? I didn't know how to insert myself into a scene and create opportunities for myself instead of them coming to me. I didn't know how to turn being good into something consistent. I spent so much of my time and energy at university focusing on getting really good, which is obviously important, right? But that move to Melbourne made me realize that there's more to it than just being good. So in real terms, my life in Melbourne looked like, I was doing like 1 day a week of teaching, a few scattered gigs, and a lot of empty space in between. Not necessarily enough for things to fall apart, but I didn't really feel like things were moving forward or that I could relax, And looking back, this is the part I wish I'd really understood earlier. Being good at music is not enough. A lot of what I focus on now is creating stability through online teaching, because honestly, that's the thing that I'd wish I had built properly when I first started out, right? But it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be teaching. It could be some other skill entirely. But the point is, being good is not enough, right? You need to develop the skills that can actually sustain you. You need something that keeps you afloat. Because if you don't build something around your playing that creates stability, right, you end up relying on luck and timing and other people's decisions. And that's a stressful way to build your career, right? That's something I really wish that I'd known sooner. Now, because I couldn't make enough from music, I started taking other jobs. I started taking whatever work I could find. And I had one random day a week of teaching, a few gigs here and there. And then at one point, I ended up getting a job as a dealer at a casino, a croupier, right? And yeah, it was pretty good money, right? I developed some stability, but mentally it was rough, right? Instead of spending my days practicing or playing, I was sitting behind a betting table, watching other people gamble their money away. Night after night, it was the same routine, right? The same sounds, the same environment. And after a while, this question started to creep in, which was, am I even a musician anymore, right? And it wasn't this dramatic thing. It was just more quietly, right? On the days where I hadn't touched my instrument at all, in the past, I'd always judged those weekend warrior types, we used to call them, right? The ones who have a full-time job and who gigged on the side. And I remember genuinely thinking like, that's what happens if you don't make it. I look down at my nose at those people. But now at this point, that was me, right? I had this croupier job and I didn't say it out loud, but I felt like I'd crossed some invisible line, like I'd failed some unspoken test. And for a long time, I didn't have a clean answer to that identity question. I just kind of carried that discomfort with me. It took a while before I realized something that seems really obvious now, but really didn't feel obvious then. Nobody else actually gets to decide what being a musician means for you. If you play music, you're a musician. Not because it's your job title, because it's what you do, right? Teaching, gigging twice a month, playing full time, taking other work to survive, none of that cancels your identity, right? And the whole idea that you've either made it or failed is just a story that is perpetuated, usually to keep score and to often judge other people, right? But realizing this didn't change things overnight for me, but it did loosen the grip of that shame, right? And that associated feeling with feeling like I'd failed as a musician. Once that grip started to ease, something interesting actually happened. So around a similar time, I got offered a gig that kind of completely reignited my relationship with music. Right around that time, I got offered a gig in Malaysia. It was like a 2-month hotel residency in Kuala Lumpur, playing with some really good musicians, right? A couple of really close friends of mine. I remember handing in my notice at the casino and, jumping on the plane and just feeling this huge sense of relief. Like, okay, I'm back in the game. The first night, that we played the gig, it was great. We played great tunes, good players, good energy. It was fun, and it was good money too. And for the first time in a while, I wasn't questioning whether or not I belonged there. I was just playing. I was just happy to be playing. And that alone kind of changed something in my mind. And it reminded me why I started doing this in the first place, right? It wasn't for the labels or like these milestones. It was just for the feeling of being locked in with other musicians and doing the thing properly, But after a few weeks, something else kind of crept in, because on paper, this was it. I was playing full time again. I was getting paid to play, and, the kind of thing that some people might point to as making it, and yet I started to realize how strange that idea actually is, right? Success in music isn't about making it. It's about staying in it. There wasn't some moment where everything clicked and stayed there. There's no finish line, no sense of arrival, right? I realized that success in music isn't one specific outcome. It's personal, right? And for some people, it's gigging twice a month and loving it, right? For others, it's teaching full time, or being a recording session player or running something online, right? For others, it's touring nonstop with a big artist, right? None of those cancel the others out. What mattered more than any single version of success was just staying in the game long enough to keep finding fulfillment from it. That residency I did was the first time I really understood that, right? When I came home, I still wanted to play, but I also knew I didn't want to keep bouncing between kind of relief and panic, right? I wanted something that could support me a bit more long term. And that mindset is what kind of led me into the next phase, which were the cruise ship years. Not long after that Malaysia gig, I ended up doing cruise ships for a couple of years, playing drums full time. I was traveling, I was saving a bit of money. And again, on paper, it was great. Like I was working a lot, I was playing a lot, I was getting paid for it. I didn't have rent or bills to worry about for a while, which was pretty cool. It's a unique experience for sure. But underneath that, there was this strange feeling that I'd kind of stepped sideways instead of forward. I was playing every night, but I wasn't really part of a scene anymore, right? When you're on a ship, you're literally out at sea, right? I wasn't building momentum in a city. I wasn't meeting new players or kind of planting roots somewhere. I'd wake up in a different place, do the show, go back to the cabin, rinse and repeat basically for 2 years. It felt safe, but it also felt kind of suspended. Like time was passing, but nothing was really compounding. And that's when something clicked for me, and I realized I'd massively underestimated how long it actually takes to build a sustainable career in music. Not to just land one gig, right? Not to have a good year, but to build something that holds up over time. Building a sustainable music career takes longer than you think. Up until then, I've been treating every opportunity like it needed to work now, like if it didn't move things forward quickly, it wasn't worth doing it, right? But the truth is the cruise ship years kind of forced me to zoom out. And instead of asking, what's next? Or, I started asking like, okay, now that I have all this time, what can I build slowly in the background that doesn't kind of reset every time a contract ends or a gig ends, right? So in the downtime in between shows, I started thinking about how to create something that kind of gave me a little bit more control, something that I could grow gradually alongside my playing career to give me a bit more flexibility. And at the time, I didn't have a clear plan for this, right? I just knew I didn't want my future to depend entirely on whoever booked me next. Those years didn't push my career forward in obvious ways, but it gave me the time and opportunity that I was missing to start thinking more long-term and thinking about things like building something online, more of the teaching thing, which is what I did, or eventually moving overseas, right? And the reactions I got from other musicians were pretty interesting. So around this time, when I started telling people that I wanted to actually move to London or that I was trying to build something online, the reactions were mixed, right? Some people, some of my friends were genuinely supportive, right? But a lot of conversations started going the same way, right? People would say things like, oh man, London's so expensive, it's so competitive, like you'll never stand out there, everyone's trying to do the same thing, trying to set something up online. And the frustrating part was that none of that was technically wrong, right? London is expensive, okay? It is competitive and plenty of people come here to struggle, but what I started to notice was that a lot of these comments weren't really about facts. They were about fear, right? Not even my fear, but other people's, right? Underneath all of it was this unspoken sort of message like, don't aim too far ahead because if it doesn't work out, it'll hurt. And I noticed something else too. In music, struggling often gets worn like a badge of honor. Like if you're not broke or exhausted or, grafting, right, you're somehow less committed, less real, less of a real artist, right? So wanting stability or growth or a long-term plan can sound naive to people who have really struggled or they've been burned, right? I definitely got called naive, right? Not because I thought it would be easy, but because I still believed like that it was possible, right? And that was the moment I realized something important. You shouldn't let other people's fears become your limits. Protect your optimism. It's what keeps you moving forward. Because being realistic doesn't mean expecting things to fail, right? It means understanding the difficulty and still choosing to back yourself and still believing, that you can achieve what you want to achieve. Looking back, that mattered more than any single decision I made, right? That mix of patience and optimism is exactly what helped me take the next step. Because when I eventually did move to London, that mindset really got tested to the max. So eventually I made the move to London, and I'll be honest, it was tough, right? It took time, especially because I arrived right before the pandemic happened, right? So there was no instant sense of arrival, no moment where everything suddenly just kind of worked. But slowly, right, things started to take shape. I'd been building my online drum coaching program, which was doing really well. I was posting a lot of content. I was getting students for that. I was learning how to actually turn what I knew into something useful for other people, right? And for the first time, because of that, I had something consistent, right? Not just living gig to gig. I wasn't just waiting for the next call, but I had something that gave me a bit more control, right? A bit more freedom with my career. And that consistency changed how I related to everything else. So I didn't have to chase every gig or just to cover my rent, right? I could say yes to the projects that I really cared about. It allowed me to be a bit more tactical and strategic with kind of building the network in London, which ultimately led me to the gig that I'm on now, which is playing a theatre show in the West End. And maybe the most unexpected part was this, right? I started to enjoy parts of the process that I'd never really paid much attention to before. Teaching. I fell in love with teaching and coaching and thinking about how musicians actually make decisions, how confidence works, how communication works. That really caught me off guard, right? Because for a long time, I'd only ever seen myself as a drummer. So when coaching started to matter to me a bit more, I kind of had to sit with this uncomfortable question for a little bit. Like, does this make me less of a musician? Similar to what I felt earlier, right? Am I somehow like selling out because I care about building something stable? It took time to realize that wasn't the right way to look at it. It wasn't losing something, it was just changing. And that's something, again, I wish I understood earlier. It's okay if what you want changes. 10 years ago, all I wanted was to be the best drummer in the world, right? I wanted to take over the world playing drums. But now I'm actually more interested in helping other musicians build a life that kind of works for them and, build an online teaching presence. And that's not failure, right? It's just a different definition of success. Because if you want to stay in this long term, you're supposed to change. That's how you stay in the game. So now I've been working on this theatre show in London for the past 18 months and it's about to come to a close. I'm again transitioning basically full-time into coaching musicians on how to build sustainable income through online teaching. And that change feels strangely familiar, right? Because if there's one thing this whole journey has taught me, it's that nothing in music ever really settles permanently. Gigs end, chapters close, new ones open, but what matters is whether you've built a way to stay in it when that happens. Looking back at my 20s, I don't regret the mistakes. I only regret how long it took me to understand the game that I was actually playing. Not necessarily how to get a gig, not how to make it, but just how to build a life that let me keep doing music without burning out or without losing myself along the way. If you're earlier in that journey right now, I hope hearing this might shorten the learning curve a little bit, not necessarily by giving you answers, but just by helping you ask better questions sooner. Because staying in the game long enough to figure out what you want, that's what it's all about.